Good to go.
And so I will call the Neary Building Committee Finance Subcommittee meeting to order on February the 10th at 1:04 p.m. Everyone's here. Hi, everybody. So this will be a very substantive meeting. We don't have minutes from the 24th of January, nor do we have invoices. So it's solely going to be to talk about the new cost estimate that we got on late Thursday. Okay. And we did ask, and thank you for coming, the architects to be here also, because I think we've really got to dig into this and make sure we understand things that we wouldn't without them. So thank you guys for joining. And it sounds like it's going to be a day devoted to Southborough by the time it's over with. So for the record, we don't yet have our town 5-year projection that includes the permanent debt on the building. Brian's working on it, but this is just a lot of work. So today, we're only going to talk about the cost estimate that we received last week and ask all the questions that hopefully we need to ask, and plus talk about where we think we may need to end up to get this thing passed on May 10th. Okay, so I've got my questions written down. I think Andrew's looked at it close. Mark, I hope you've had a chance to look at it. I know you didn't have much time. Okay. All right, so I think unless someone disagrees, let's just dive in and direct the questions to Jim, Larry, Andy, and Katie as far as numbers we see here. Brian, feel free to pop in when you've got something you want to ask or something we haven't asked correctly. Sound like a plan?
Yep.
So Andrew, I'll start with you, then go to Mark, and then end up with me as far as information we want to get to understand this better. And then also as part of it, anything else you want the architects to do in the next week or so to try to get this number down further.
Yeah, I mean, I think taking through it, I mean, obviously some costs went down, which is great. A couple went up that I had questions on, that being the site work and the exterior closure. I think there was a couple of line items that were added, like the acoustical panels for the roof and things like that, that were net new that, I think we might want to add as a VE or an adult or something like that. But I don't know, Jim, what you have like prepared or Aero Street has prepared in terms of like tonight to walk the whole committee through, the new one, or is it just basically like we're just going to throw 3011 and just say like this is where we're at? I wasn't sure if there was like a walk or we're just gonna do both.
Yeah, so I was just going to show the basically just the summary of where the numbers came in at. And then if there's any questions. So obviously, yeah, the total project is 110,984, with the town share being 77.9 million. So at the time of PSR, we were at 83.4 million. And our effective rate went up by, let's say, just about 3 points, through 3.6 points. So the driving factor there was obviously the increase in the square foot allowance, the site allowance. So those two factors came up. And then the late breaking last week, the increase to our base reimbursement rate. That came up by, I think it was 1.45 points. And then our maintenance incentive point, MSBA informed us that is going to be 1.42. And then we added the 4 points for green schools.
Okay,
so
right there on that piece, because this is important what you just said. This alone really accounted for the reduction. So Jim, I've got a little bit different numbers on the first 311, but it's close enough. But to go from an effective rate, I thought was 25.29 to 29.8 is a pretty big deal. And that explains most of the reduction in the bond that the town is going to have to float. But I really want to understand, because I want to know if maybe there's even more room to increase that. What caused them? Because you told us before, 39.84 is fixed. So we didn't think any more about it. What caused them to go from 39.84 to the 41.26?
So they reassessed the calendar year of your PFA. This is the first project I've been involved with that they've increased it.
What's a PFA?
Um,
It's a PFA.
So project funding agreement. So your grant, essentially, what they issue as your grant. So they reassess. There's multiple factors. I do have a call into Christine so that she can give us a bit more detail on the reasoning for the increase. But again, I've been on very long projects that they, it doesn't increase. So I think it's obviously a good thing that it did.
Yeah, no, it's great. Okay, I really do want to understand though how they did this. I really want to go as detailed as we can, just to make sure we understand the math in case there's a mistake, and we could even go further. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because Hopkinton, next to us, has a much better gross reimbursement rate than we do. In my mind, Hopkinton is a whole lot like Southborough. It's twice as big population-wise, but it really does look like Southborough as far as character, type of stuff going on there. So I just don't understand why theirs would be so much more than ours, nor do I understand why it did go up. So I really do want to understand this. And what I'm hoping you're going to hear is the following. There's a possibility that, given that one of the factors in this is the wealth factor of the towns, the state uses that for a whole lot of things. That's how we get our school money. That's how a lot of things get determined. And Southborough's always been considered a fairly wealthy town compared to the other 350 towns in the Commonwealth. That could be changing. I haven't looked at the math in the last few months, but that could be changing. That might be what happened here. They looked at a later year and we weren't quite as wealthy as the previous year. But I want to understand this, Jim, because this is, if we could push it again, or they've done the math wrong, I just want to see how they got to that number and what truly caused it. So your homework's still to be done on that one. Now, the maintenance, why did they decide on 1.44 instead of 2? I mean, where did they get the information to even make that determination?
So that's with your SOI, you submit a maintenance plan, and they go off of that, and they assess that. I can add that to the discussion as to, I'm sure they have a formula as to why. I know it's not arbitrary, but yeah, we can put that on the list as well to get clarification on.
Because then the follow-up question is, can we revise the SOI and add more whatever they believe is appropriate to get to 2 points, or is it worth it? Would it cost more than what we get back? So I still think we want to push on that one too, because every little bit helps as far as trying to get this $77 million down even lower by the time we get to town meeting.
Yep, understood.
Okay, all right. And the other reason I'm pushing on this in this open meeting, I hope people will look at this. Right now, we've got Sam Stivers, as always, looking at it, nobody else. I hope other people look at it, if not now, later, and understand how hard the subcommittee and the full committee is working to try to get this number down to a number that is more palatable to a lot of people who are truly balking at the cost of this project. So I'm trying to show the effort we're making to get this down. Okay, Jim, back to you as far as anything else you want to say. So.
Yeah. So we just on how we got here and then the next steps. So we did have 2 independent estimates. PM&C, who is Arrow Street's estimator, and then PCM, who did our estimate. 2 totally separate independent estimates. We came together last Wednesday for a 6-hour meeting to reconcile line by line, division by division. And we got to within 0.045% of each other. And that's where you want to be for reconciled estimate. So what's put forth as the estimator of record, which is PM&C, that's considered now the reconciled estimate, but that is a reconciliation of the 2 numbers. So with that, we need to, at the end of this week on Friday, we need to submit to the MSBA. It's called a pre-schematic design notification to them. It's just a email, but they give you the form giving the OPM's estimate, dollar value, PM&C's dollar value estimate, the total project budget, and then the town's budget. So this is a check to see that we are within what the town considers their budget. So we would at this juncture, what the project team is considering the estimate, or sorry, the town's budget is what we were at PSR. So that's what we're going forward with. So we do have to finalize our numbers by Friday in order to have that, because that's 10 days out from submission to the MSBA.
But you were gonna ask for some leeway in that date.
Correct. Yep.
Monday's a holiday, so we've talked about trying to get some leeway to the following Tuesday.
Yeah, we just have to let them know. I just want to be careful how I word this on this meeting. We do have an option for that, but it can't go later than next Tuesday.
Okay, so you know for a fact that we can submit the cost information next Tuesday.
They just want a notification by Wednesday, Thursday this week, if we are going to push that by a couple of days. So we'll have to know by then, at least by end of day Thursday.
Okay. All right, keep going. Do you want to say anything else before Andrew Pfaff asks specific questions?
No, just one point of clarification. The construction costs did come down. So we are currently at 89.2, and at PSR we were at 91. So we did have a decrease. I just want to clarify that one point. Obviously, the town share, all those additional reimbursables and increases helped with that, but the overall cost did come down.
Right, a little bit, not much. So you say the town reimbursables, what do you mean by that?
So the town share, all the reimbursement increases, just to clarify that.
The grant, because the grant went up, the town went down. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Okay. And it looks like the overall budget though went from 113,436 to 110,984. Does everybody agree with the numbers?
Correct.
All right, Andrew.
I mean, why don't you go to Mark first and see if he had anything specifically?
Mark.
I just wanted to ask a very general question, and then Andrew, you can have at it. The elephant in the room, how did you treat tariffs in your budget?
So we reached out to the estimators. And so right now they're basing it off of current bids. That's an unknown. But that's how they proceeded.
So we can assume all these numbers are tariff absent, correct?
Correct. It's certainly a risk at bid time, but it's an unknown in the timing of it.
And Jim, that would get fixed at bid time, right? And that would be what, a year and a half from now, maybe?
Yep.
Okay. So
No, actually, that's the answer I wanted to hear. Because you can't set a budget 18 months out and make assumptions of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Even today. Tariffs are going to be tariffs in the town, and we need to realize we're all subject to that. Okay,
Yeah.
That's the only overriding question I had.
and really it's the steel that's going to be the main driving factor there, right?
Yeah, steel, lumber. Yeah.
Well, he just whacked a 25% tariff on all Canadian steel and aluminum. So as to whether it's going to take effect, I doubt it. But no, we can't be concerned with it.
Okay, but we do know that there is no impact of potential tariffs in these numbers. That's what I think we take away from what Mark just asked and what Jim just said, correct?
Sure. Correct.
I would say, Jim, except don't they include like an inflation adjustment?
They include
so-
escalation on everything. So
So it's
Yep.
inflation adjusted to the point at which we think we're going to need to pay for it, but they're not including any specific tariff.
yeah, what did we land on for escalation? We're carrying 5% escalation to the start of construction.
Andrew?
Yes, I think going line by line, the site costs seem to increase
A lot.
a lot. I mean, not a lot, but I mean, there was like different lines are moving here and there, but, kind of one that stuck out to me was exterior closure. So I wasn't sure, and that's probably more for Arrow Street. Is that because we picked different materials between the PSR and now, or something?
So just before Arrow Street, just for the site cost, a big clarification is we brought the geothermal wells into site. That's how MSBA wants you to report it. So that's obviously what was a big
That's
uptick.
why HVAC didn't change. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. And I know when we spoke, I was
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's obviously a big increase there. So Katie or Larry or Andy on the exterior closures. I know we chatted, but
I was just gonna say, the other thing is the allowance for some disposal of soil out of state.
We're gonna talk
we've-
about that, Larry, separately, so hold the thought on that one. We know about that one, but stay on what
Okay.
you said. Because Jim, unless I'm wrong, that's not what you said on Friday, as far as geothermal. We thought the geothermal went down $4 million, and we were surprised, given the numbers that Kate had showed us when she did the presentation on geothermal versus non-geothermal. It was $12 million and change. This says still 8,860,000. So I thought, oh, Kate's number must have been wrong. So it sounds like her number is not wrong, but there's $4 million someplace else for geothermal.
yes. So we carried that cost, and I did speak on Friday. We carried that cost within the site work cost. Because as of right now. Yep.
What's the page number that it's on?
So it is.
You're looking at the estimate.
Yep.
It's on page 5, which is the summary. It's at the bottom. 2.2 million of site costs for utilities as geothermal wells.
Thank you, Larry.
That's the summary, and then you'll see a similar, more detailed line breaking down. I don't know, page 24, 25, 26, somewhere in that area.
Okay, but if you go back to, so Larry, I've got it all in front of me. If you go back to where it's, call it page 7, construction cost summary, it's got HVAC, 8,860,000.
Yep.
Okay, and then I add the 2 to it, I get what, 10, 11,160,000?
Okay.
60. It's still less than what we showed us that night. Had it come down, or is there something else someplace else that ties back to that slide that Kate showed us as far as the cost of HVAC?
Good question. I don't know. We haven't actually made that comparison. Kate was using numbers. Let's see, when did we talk about that one? Because the cost estimate itself didn't change. So let us look into it, I guess, Kathy, if you're trying to tie those two together, let us get back to you on that.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, we understand. And I may be wrong, but I do remember 12 as being the first number, or the millions that were for geothermal. Okay, so there's that.
Mhm.
To be clear, the geothermal should be 8,860 plus 2.22.
Yes, so again, by the 8860 is the HVAC in its entirety, which includes other things beyond the geothermal system. So it includes ventilation for like toilets and all kinds of things that may not be just geothermal. So
Okay, but the HVAC system then is 8.860 plus
correct. Yep.
2.22 to do the geothermal piece of it.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
all right, Andrew, back to you.
So just to make sure I have it right. So the geothermal is in what section of the PM&C? Or is it only in the 3011?
It's on page 5 at the bottom of the estimate. So it's
Geothermal. Oh, it's in utilities. Okay, okay.
Yep. Yeah, sorry, utilities. Yep.
How about the exterior closure?
Katie, Larry, do you want to walk through?
And it looks like it's mostly exterior walls.
So one thing the estimator pointed out, in the early estimate, we were guesstimating on how many of different materials we'd have, what percentage. So what percentage of brick we'd have versus that metal that's on the the media center and art wing at the top. And what they did in the SD estimate was take off actual values, right? So we had to sort of squint at it for PSR and say, here's what we're anticipating. But then in SD, they took actual takeoffs. So the split changed slightly between those two because they did actual takeoffs. And then secondly, we had also given them a value for the roof screen. We did a takeoff comparing to another project, looking at where we anticipate the mechanical units are going to sit, and looking at basically shielding it from the abutters around the site. So it's really towards the back instead of towards the front, and gave them a value for to carry for that for the roof screens.
So it's basically just because brick is so much more expensive than the other materials we had.
Well, no, I think it's that we had an 80-20 split and now we have 25-75. So it's just the difference in the cost of the two different materials.
Okay, so just to be, we've
So a
got,
5% shift in the materials, right, is $2 million.
it's more than that, isn't it?
That's the high level. I mean, it's not every bit of change, but if you're trying to come up with, you know, one large thing that changed, that's what they're saying. The difference between a guess, you know, an estimate in the beginning and a more accurate value. He's obviously fine-tuning his costs on lots of different materials as far as the market rates are going right now. So there's some up and some down throughout.
Andrew, the numbers I'm looking at, comparing the first to the second, B20 is 5,599,000 on number 1. Number 2 is 9,358,000. So almost double. What are you looking at? It looks like it's even more than what you said.
Yeah, I mean, even just looking at the brick veneer, I mean, we went from 30,000 square feet to 36,000 square feet, but we also went up in the cost. But even that's 500,000 there, and then there's some ancillary lines for flashing and sealant and some other small things, but just having trouble walking from one to the other.
Well,
It doesn't look like the total closure area increased. I could be wrong, but it looks like it actually down from 51 to 49.
I think it's important for comparing these estimates. It was unknown scope that we knew that would be there. Over the last 5 months, that scope has been identified, and a cost was put to it. So I think we can go round and round on, what was shown in the PSR, like Katie just ran through the big chunks, but we didn't have schematic level drawings at the time of PSR. We were making assumptions. So we are pricing and estimating scope at this point. So that's, if you make an assumption and it comes up, that's the process. And I understand, and again, some of that increase we, like Katie just touched on, but I think getting too granular with it is, it could go round and round because, just the level of information that you have at PSR compared to SD.
Yeah, I get that, but if the basic fundamental thing is, okay, this is how much square footage and the cost per square foot, and yeah, we have different design, different materials, and we've gotten further along. But I just can't foot back to the square footage, right? We have the closure's smaller, but we're up significantly more. And I can't figure out what the line, like, unless new materials were added that we never had in there before, I can't foot to the numbers, right? And I can't explain the walk, right? It's one thing to say, okay, and then what happened in the decision? Was there a decision made to switch materials to do something more expensive that the price went up, right? Whatever the definition is, but I can't just say, oh yeah, it's just $2 million, no big deal, right? That's a significant portion of the project.
So, I mean, I think the explanation is what Katie just ran through. And then, it's just, the process of pricing and, having identified scope.
Some of it is, Katie, I think you were pointing it out. We're now at $120 a foot for curtain wall, and we were at $100 a foot for curtain wall. And I think some of that is being driven by Peter Bradley responding to what he's seeing in the bid market. Some of it's being driven by changes to percentages. I think in general, the building is more or less consistent with a couple of materials and generally about the same amount of window to wall ratio. One thing you do start to see is in the PSR estimate, we had 15% for design contingency. And what typically happens is some of that money moves sideways into the actual line item costs. So now we're at 10% design contingency. So in essence, the 5% in moving is moving into the design costs that they're then doing detailed takeoffs on.
Yeah, it looks like gypsum board went up a lot in terms of square footage.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of things that are moving.
Okay, but Larry, I just have a hard time buying that the cost has gone from $100 a square foot to 120 from May of 24 to December of 24, 20%?
Well, I would be happy to get our estimator to meet with you guys if you want to ask him.
But that's just the cladding, right?
Well, that's on the example was the curtain wall.
Yeah.
Or storefront or
Yeah, I mean, the
glazing.
price is increasing, a little bit here and there, but like having, I don't know what gypsum board assembly is. I'm assuming it's what's on the inside of an exterior wall.
Yeah.
But we didn't change the square footage of the school, but we went from 38,000 square feet to 47,000 square feet. Right? So did we just have the wrong number and we've corrected it? Or did we have the right number before and the second number's wrong? That's what I'm trying to get to. Right? When the overall exterior closure is not really changing. Unless it is, and I don't know it, but it doesn't look like it was. And it actually looked like it was going down. We were adding more brick, but did we miss it? Is that the right? If we have everything else is 49. Like air barrier, we're at 38,000. Now we're at 49,000. Right? So were we that off on our initial? Is the building taller? So there's more exterior walls. Like this is a kind of for that big of a change, right? I don't know what we did in the design to affect a over 20%, almost 30% increase in the amount of square footage for the walls. Right, 10%, 5%, yeah, you're tweaking things, you're moving things here, you're adding windows, removing windows. But and it's simply we were wrong before and we're right now, or we were right before and we're wrong now. And I don't know what the answer is.
I mean, I would somewhat, I would say that we weren't wrong before. We didn't have the information before. And we have the, detailed information now, schematic level drawings. So
But like what
our,
information changed, right? I mean,
Well,
the exterior of the building, right? The square footage
Yep.
of the building didn't really change between one and the other. I think it got smaller actually, right, with the second one.
I think, Andrew, to me, the question is, okay, if we can chase that down, and we could try to chase that down. And then the question is, what does that information provide us?
It's just comfortability and the numbers, right?
Because I think, where they've done their takeoff, so, there is a more detailed set of drawings. You guys, we just sent out the ability for you guys to download the drawings, and you'll see they're much more robust than what he had the price. So he's doing takeoffs on what he has. And then, typically at each stage, they're adding some amount of expected or anticipated scope that they don't see in the drawings, but they're saying, okay, we got to add it. And some of that's coming in the design and pricing contingency. So I'm not sure where we would
But like
say
he looked at two drawings.
one number
Right?
is
He said,
right, and
this
one number is
drawing I
wrong.
thought was 40,000. This drawing I think is 50,000. Right? I don't know what he saw and what the definition there. Right?
Okay.
Oh, in the initial one the walls were 10 feet high. Then this one is 12 feet high. Right? Great. There's the increase in 20%. That makes sense to a novice, doesn't understand this stuff on a day in, day out. Right? But I don't see that much changing from the size of the building, the number of walls from plan 1 to plan 2 as a novice, right? He deals with this all day. I just want to make sure, right, for that large of an increase, right, that there wasn't something missed, that we could then save a few extra $1 million, which makes this project even more likely to get approved, right? Every $1 million here helps in terms of the likeliness of this project even getting approved. So it's not like, let's get it approved. We'll try to get it out when we go into, final design and working out with bids. I'm trying to get to the most accurate, lowest number we can to even get this thing approved, because right now it's not looking good.
So,
Well, let's see. So we had two estimators who ran through both sets of drawings independently from each other. And then they compared notes last Wednesday, as Jim mentioned, and we spent about 6 hours with them going back and forth. And a lot of what they do is compare quantities, so they feel like they're on the same stage.
Yeah.
What we're hearing typically is each of them sort of feels they know where the market is, so they will tend to adjust their quantities depending on what they find with each other, but they tend to keep their numbers a little tighter to themselves. But I wouldn't say that there's some mistake that is hidden in the new estimate, because I feel that with two estimators, and that's the process, that they both came out to a pretty tight number in all instances. And we went top to bottom in terms of the different systems. And again, they were comparing various quantities. Wherever we saw a disconnect, they sort of knit it back together. So I don't necessarily think there's a missing or extra added at this point.
I'm not saying there's a mistake, right? I'm saying there was a significant change that they
There-
saw both times they looked at it. And right, and I don't know, and we don't have the information on what both estimators said, right? If
Right.
both estimators came in on exactly the same number, they both saw exactly the same thing independently, right? And I don't know what that, right? I'm just bringing up somebody that's looking at a specific line item that went from, I mean, the cost is, the cost, right? That I'm not going to challenge on whether it's $18 a square foot or $16 a square foot. I have no idea.
Mhm,
Right?
mhm.
When something goes from 38,000 to 47,000 square footage, right? We're talking absolutes, right? It was this, and now it's this. We'll forget the cost, right? It's just the square footage.
Well, let me ask you this, Larry. Did we have, at the PSR, did they take off based on a Revit model? Or is that only at ST?
We give
Okay.
them the Revit model so that they have it if they want to spin around just to understand,
Or sorry, not to
Mhm.
estimate off, but they have that information. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I mean, if we really want to chase it around, we can try and establish where the difference is. That's going to take some time for us to sort out the difference between the two and then talk to PM&C and try and figure out where exactly all those push and pulls are happening in a way that we can say, okay, this is the differential between the two.
I mean, the biggest one is it seems like for the closure, the total square footage went up, roughly 10,000 square foot was 38. Now it's 47 or, 36, and now it's 49, depending on which material you're looking at. Right. So
Mhm.
it's common, right? And which is good, right? It would be weird if one went up and one went down. But I just don't, I take your point. I mean, I think it's a pretty common thing that they saw from one to the other in terms of the exterior square footage went up and then the corresponding materials have an effect there, but I just can't speak to what I saw in a design change from then till now that would have increased the exterior square footage over 20%.
Okay, so I guess, Larry, are you saying you can go back to PM&C and just see if we can get a answer at least on the square footage piece?
We can, although it's probably more on us than it is on PM&C.
Okay.
And the question is that, are you guys wanting us to do that? In which case we can do it. It's not going to be instantaneous, but when our first pass at it was, okay, we asked them very quickly what they thought the issues was, and that's the ones Katie brought up.
So why don't we back up for a moment and set the stage to why we're going to push as hard as we are in this meeting.
Mhm.
So we've got the annual town meeting April 7th. We've got the special town meeting to approve this project on May 10th. We finished our budget summit for the fiscal year 26 budget on Saturday. And we have ended up with a projected year-over-year increase that is higher than I've ever seen in all my years on the finance committee and on select board, way higher. It's over 9%. We have also included in that, this is for an average house. We've also included in that a small projected shift in the price increases for houses versus price increases for commercial property, because that's what's happened ever since COVID. So we built a little bit of that in there, but maybe not enough. So we are really concerned about going to town meeting on April 7th with a really significant year-over-year budget increase. And then coming back a month later and asking for this. So I appreciate the fact you've got two independent estimates. That gives me a lot of pause for pushing too much, that they were that close. If they were truly independent, you're saying they were. These guys should know what they're doing. But let's roll back to what happened with the last big project we had in town. Jason Malinowski was very involved in that one too. He was also chair of that committee. So we went to town meeting, got the public safety building approved there, and asked for a large amount of money that in the end was well more than what the bid came in when that finally happened. And I know that can happen. I know that could happen here too. We don't know. But what's going to matter is the vote in May. No one's going to care that down the road, when we actually send the bid might be less than what we're showing here. It will depend on a lot of things that we can't project. It could go the other way too.
Mhm.
So we understand that the actual bid might be a lot less than this, but we don't know. So we can't count on that. We've got to look at what we've got here, and that's what everybody's going to base their vote on. Second, we've got to get the full cost of the project approved at town meeting. Even though we know we are going to get a significant $32 million, $33 million grant. We've got to get the full cost approved. So the number we're going to be floating out there is 110 million instead of 77. We'll explain it, but it's 110 that's probably going to stick. People don't hear things very well. They come to town meeting in some cases without having done much homework. In this case, I hope most people will have had some types of meetings and at least have some idea what's going on, but we don't know. So we're going to be talking 110 and not 77 as far as at least what's in the article that has to be approved. So that doesn't help us. But doing this 9% increase, and Andrew and I, we don't know how we're going to get it down. Brian either. We cut it pretty sharply on Saturday, but we don't have any magic tricks to pull out to get it lower like we usually do. So I think it's going to go in pretty close to that. Maybe 8's the first number, but 8's still a lot when inflation last year was 3%. So we do believe that this project is in possibly trouble, given the 2/3 vote that we need. The seniors have all talked, they all get together, and they've decided that they oppose this project because of cost. They would like to see us apparently expand Fenn. I'm going over there and meeting with a bunch tomorrow, so continue to do our thing to try to convince them that this project really is the right project at this time for this town, but it's a hard sell. So I wasn't gonna talk about any one line item other than the $1,250,000 for the out-of-state removal of anything hazardous. I do want to talk about that one. But all I'm gonna say is, now is the time to do the value engineering. It's not when we get these, it's not when the vote fails and then we try to figure out what to do. I am truly worried that it's going to fail, and I don't want to have to go through this again. I want to try to get it passed the first time, and therefore and this is just me, I told Jason I'd be the bad guy on this. We've got to do something to get this $78 million town share down. And I don't know how to do it without asking. That's why I wanted Katie and Larry to be here. And because it's going to be on you guys to figure this out. It's not Jim. It's got to be you guys to say, well, something we really could do some things different here if you really wanted to try to get the cost down without reducing the size. I think the chances of these adults being added are probably small. We can't add any more cost to this. But I think we got to try to get it down further, and Jim's going to go. I already know what you're going to say, Jim. No way, because you said it last time. But if that first number were 6 for the town, I don't care if it's 69,999,999. I think that it would make a big difference to be able to show the town the trend of costs and how much we have pushed to get this down to something that's palatable. This is still $1,115 per square foot. As far as the cost that we have right now, and that's still a lot per square foot. Talk to builders, they just go, you gotta be kidding me. How can it possibly be? And these are experienced builders that build a whole lot of stuff, maybe not municipal stuff. So that's my purpose of trying to really push today, is to see if Larry and Katie think that there is anything they can do over the next week. That's why, Jim, we need those extra days to try to find a way that would be proposed to get something significant that's, in millions of dollars out of this project, so we'd have a smaller town share come May 10th.
So with the VE process, and this is why we timed it out this way, we can certainly look at that. I want to set the expectation, as you noted, to get to a 6 in front of it is $12 million out of construction. That is not decreasing costs, that's taking scope out of the project. You're taking square footage out of the building. And then what you have left doesn't meet the educational program, because that's what MSBA is going to look at.
Where did you the math on the 12, Jim?
Simply just putting it in the building cost, decreasing that down in the 3011. And that takes, all the designer fees, OPM fees, contingencies are all a formula based off percentage. So we decrease the building costs down. You have to get the building costs down to about 75 million. And again, that's just rough math. But to take 12 million out of this building, you're taking scope out of the building or out of the project.
Just now did the math, you just did it real quick to see the $12 million is the number, because what I'd hoped is that we wouldn't have to take 12 to get to 78, that because the reimbursable construction cost per square foot, the 586, that if we could just narrow that gap, so it would come out of the town side, so we'd only need to take 8 out to save 8 on the town side. And you're saying, no, not going to work that way.
Yeah. We can do a little bit of a deeper dive on it. But that's pretty much the straight calculation, just when I plugged it in the 3011. So I mean, to take that much cost out of construction is going to be scope. We can come back with VE items that would take, not 10 million, but 6 figures out of the project, perhaps. I think that's feasible. The elephant in the room is the geothermal wells. If you want to back those out, that takes the construction costs down. On the back end, you have your incentives, so that's there, but that's a big driver. That would take a big bite out of it as far as the upfront cost.
We intend to mention the incentives in the presentation, but I still think that's gonna go in one year out there, the two. They're still gonna be looking at the bond of $78 million that they're going to at least start with as far as what we think it is. And there's just no guarantee those incentives are gonna come through. I mean, we'd be fools there, just like the tariffs. They're gonna come in on the back end. You gotta place the equipment in service, and we've got a very volatile federal government right now. So we'll say it, you'll guarantee someone's gonna stand up and say, are you kidding me? As far as trying to rely on that, but we'll still show people the number if they were to come through. And maybe that will help some people. Maybe it will change some people's vote. I don't know. But I think the committee wants the geothermal system. I think that's what they
Yep.
want. So I don't think that's a place to go. Did both estimators come up with $1,250,000 for removing the hazardous waste out of state?
So we looked at that, and the conversation basically was, so we married those two together.
No, that's not my
For-
question. Independently, they both come up with that number.
1.25, I think. How did that shake out, Katie, Larry? I think,
That was during the reconciliation.
yep,
The piece that they both reconciled was the amount of soil that actually goes off site. And then strategically, we had a conversation with our environmental engineer trying to understand the condition of the soils that we might find. And some of this is, if you remember, we moved the new building onto the existing building footprint. There are still some areas that were sort of not directly on the big existing building footprint. So those areas remain, and particularly in the front of the building, have some soft soil in it. So the conclusion was they reconciled the amount of soil. Then our question to the environmental engineer was, how do we characterize the potential for unsuitable materials in that fill that was brought in back in the 1960s to fill up that portion of the site? And to a certain extent, it's a little bit of an educated guess. You could say that it's essentially assuming 50% of it is fairly needs to be taken out of state, which is a special type of landfill. And the other 50% is clean.
Isn't that what the assumption was, Larry? 50%? I think that's what Jim said.
Correct. But that was during the meeting with the environmental engineer sitting at the table, so to speak. We went through and decided that was a reasonable way to approach this. You could take the approach that all 100% of that needs to go off at a premium, which would be a $3 million hit, or 2.5, 2 and change. Or you could say none of it and hope for the best when you dig it out. And we felt like, okay, let's look at it, with a reasonable lens on and think 50% might be the number to pick.
Mr. Davis, do you have a comment on this one?
No, because I've dealt with it. And I'm sitting here, all right, what's the argument? The argument would be, would we have this if we were on a different site? And we may have other issues on another site that would have this same kind of number, but just different. Rock being one of them. I saw what your allowance was. I don't think we're gonna hit rock anywhere on this site.
Mm-hmm.
But the hazardous materials thing is just something we gotta deal with. And I'm not sure how we're classifying what's hazardous.
They're
But
not.
I
Yes,
have, I have dealt with projects with a crap has to go, well, it used to be Maine. I think it's a little closer now.
Some of it goes to New Hampshire, some goes to Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I think Maine finally said no more. But there's gonna be all sorts of stuff we're not thinking of that we just can't dispose of or recycle.
So Mark, do you think the assumption that they ended up making when they were all at the table to reconcile that 50% of what's going to be removed should be considered hazardous and therefore moved to another state at a higher cost? Do you think that's a reasonable assumption to make? That's what I'm trying to get to. Is 50 right? Is it 25? Is it 75? Because that's a fairly big number.
I mean, Kathy, it seems high to me based upon breakneck, right? Like we knew we had asbestos containing materials, right? And we only thought we would need to remove 30% because they were going to sift it, right? And things like that. But even removing, and I don't know, Larry, do you know what their price per ton is in there? But anyway,
Did somebody write that down? Give me a minute.
just so I don't know if you guys know, but we just spent $4 million removing ACM and sending it up to New York and New Hampshire.
It was $100 a
180
ton.
I think.
So what they were suggesting carrying was $100 a ton,
100 a ton. Okay.
which was that 50% premium.
And if none of it was toxic, we wouldn't have to ship it to New Hampshire, Maine, whatever. We would ship it to someplace much closer and much cheaper.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So, and it's really an allowance because in the best of worlds, you spend zero.
Right.
And you return that project cost to the town. And it gives you an allowance to work against if we do encounter some stuff as we go. And the issue with testing, we could do a lot more testing, but it's still only the sort of pinprick of the boring or the test pit that you do on that particular moment. 5 feet away could be a really hot spot. Mark, you're shaking your head because you've been through this.
Yep.
And in the 1960s was all the soil that they used for fill clean. Yeah, it's a mixed bag. I know when we do work around the city of Boston, we typically encounter what's called urban fill, which has all kinds of interesting things in it. Southborough is a much different environment, particularly in the 60s, and it may have been a lot cleaner by the nature of it.
And there's nothing we can do between now and town meeting to verify the nature of the soil? You really just got to get in and do it? Is that?
Well, what you can do is a thing called pre-characterization, where you go through and you do boreholes at a regular interval, usually about 25-foot squares. And then you also take sampling in various heights. In this case, it's not very deep. When we do something in the South Boston Seaport and we're going down 30, 40 feet, you're taking them at various intervals until you hit sort of normal soil. And that you then test that and you say, okay, now I understand what I have on a sort of grid basis. And that information is good for 1 year from the date when you test it. And if you were to not construct it and disappear it within that year, remove it from the site within that year, you have to go back and retest it. So,
And that's expensive.
yeah. Most folks, unless you're really expecting something like we deal with in the Seaport District, you typically don't do it until you're about ready to start construction. And you're monitoring it as it's coming out of the site. Putting soils that look dirty over here or testing as you go, and you put soils over here and you say, okay, these we have to look at. What we typically do is try to then reuse those soils where we can in and around the site, so you're actually not taking them off site. That would be a process that we might go through in the next round of work to figure out, can we lose some of that soil underneath the paving areas in a way that means you're not trucking it off at a premium. Mark, you're shaking your head, so you've been through all this.
That's why I went to him, Larry, because he knows this. Okay, so Jim, once we do the submission next week of the cost, this reconciled cost, are we stuck then with that cost as far as MSBA is concerned? We have to bring that cost to town meeting. If something happened between then and town meeting that would significantly reduce the cost, would they let us modify what we asked town meeting for?
So we need to submit for our project scope and budget. So that those costs do need to be locked in.
I understand, but listen to my question. So I understand that piece, but my question is, if something were to happen, there would be a subsequent event where we realized something was really wrong as far as number goes and went the right way. It should be less. Would they let us modify that submission and then therefore bring a smaller number to town meeting?
I'll need to clarify that with MSBA. I haven't had that previously. Typically at the SD submittal, you are finalizing your budget. So I'll just have to clarify that with the MSBA. I don't know, Larry or Katie, if you've had that on other projects where I'm pretty sure that or substantively changes your submittal to the MSBA. So I think that would tick off a new wait period where you'd have to go to another board meeting. But I don't want to quote that until I verify that with the MSBA.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
because if that's not the case, we can't do it, then whatever we're gonna do, we gotta do the next few days and we're done. It doesn't matter what happens from that point on.
One question I have, the 1.25 is basically an additional contingency for soil conditions of which we don't know.
correct.
That a
Yes.
contingency we're required to do or we're suggesting to do, right? And I say that because, obviously you have to build in the required contingencies, right? If this is not a required one, then Kathy, if we end up finding it, right, maybe it's something that comes out of we won't get MSBA reimbursement, but it might be something that the town has to find additional funding source for. But it's
So
not a required contingency. Do we have to carry it?
let's see, I think from the MSBA standpoint, I wouldn't expect that you have to carry it.
No.
From the standpoint of finding it and then finding money to deal with it, I think is the most difficult situation because you need to move quickly during construction. And anytime you stop moving during construction, that's really costly. And so if you don't have the ability to move forward and say, okay, we need to deal with something we found, then that can really upend your costs
We just
during
approved
construction.
a $2 million overage on our basically the same disposal for asbestos containing material for Breakneck Hill in a matter of, I don't know, matter of weeks, Kathy. It wasn't a long time.
Yeah, and if,
So with MSBA, you have to remember, no, this is not incentives, all of that. The MSBA has come along with that. If you fund it from somewhere else within the project scope, MSBA takes that amount off of their grant. So you have to factor that in as well. So what we're saying here is that we're trying to mitigate an unknown. We have a contingency. However, that contingency at 2.5%, we're basically gambling over 50% of it on this potential unknown. So that's a risk assessment that the group will have to make, but that's where we are. So
is can we use the contingency for this? But now hold this thought too. Once everything's done, you're off to the races, doing the detailed design, and then it goes out to bid. What happens then? The bids come in higher than what we've had approved. What do you do then?
So if the bids, so that would be a VE effort to bring the budget down.
And what if you couldn't?
You can't exceed the project funding agreement with the MSBA. It would have to be funded outside of the project.
All right, so they're not giving us any more than what they say in the funding agreement, period. And if the bids came in and Katie and Larry couldn't value engineer it to get it down again, then we'd be stuck paying for that excess ourselves somehow, some way, if we wanted the project to go forward.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so hear me out, Katie and Larry. If would scenario, why can't we try to do that value engineering right now? Let's assume that it is too much. So assume that a scenario and see if we can't get something out of this right now to try to make this more digestible by town meeting.
So, sorry to answer for that. I mean, I think that's understood, and we built a little bit of time in for that VE. And I think we can come back with some numbers. Again, I just want to set the expectation that And to clarify, this is why you don't do the 3011 on the fly. If we were to
And Jim,
take,
make sure if you change the 3011, you had the fixed number there for the overfunding cap.
Yep.
You got to actually reference the field on the side because it's only like you only need like 7 million technically from construction costs to get it below 70.
correct. Yep. Yeah. So I got the 7.5. So yeah, when you balance that out. So just to clarify, I know I said 12 to start. But
Okay, well, what is it now?
so if we were to take 8 million out, the town share would be 68.5. So I can continue to play, but on the side.
7.25, Kathy, something like that.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
What I'm asking is to get it down to 69, what would be the decrease in the top line? You said it was 12 and now it's not, it's something else.
Yeah, so when I put 8 in, we get to, when I take 8 out of construction, we get to 68.5 for the town share.
All right, so 8 million, so we go from 110 to 102, right? In
Yep.
total. In total,
102 1016, yeah. Yep.
all right, and that will get us down to 68 and change for the town share?
Yeah, but again, with that volume of dollars coming out of the project, that's scope coming out of the project, which I not sound like a broken record, but that there is no, I will 100% give Arrow Street and Greg's team, this is a very lean design, lean building. You know, I've seen a lot of these schools that at this stage have a lot more bells and whistles and things in them. We are already, what you guys have is a very lean design. You know, that's not to say that we can't go back and squeeze a little bit more out. I can't set the expectation that we're going to take $8 million out of this without removing significant portions of the building.
Okay, so here's another scenario. If in the end, the bids come in less than what you've got here, right? The actual bid comes in less. Does the MSBA give us less then because it's less, or do they still give us the $33 million?
No, they do a PFA bid amendment. So when the bid comes in, they reassess where those come in. So if we come in under budget, they decrease the grant proportionally.
All right, so they do it one way if it's less, and they don't do it the other way if it's more.
Correct.
All right, so Mark and Andrew, I don't know what else to say as far as the question I'm trying to get to here, which is, can in the next week or so, Katie and Larry and Andy take a look at this and see if we can do some VE that would be meaningful. Jim said you ain't gonna get what you want in total. That's impossible without changing the project. But is there something we can get that actually is in 7 figures?
Well, the other number we don't know in here is what would our reimbursement be for you know, the geothermal or mass save or other numbers. I don't remember, Katie, if you have that from when we did the geothermal conversation, but it was what, 4 or 5 million, maybe more. I can't remember.
You can find the slide that was presented.
Right. So
And-
Kathy was just saying, like, after rebates, right? Let's assume that they're still there.
Yeah.
Right. I don't think I can. You have to. But if with that, right, and maybe with a little VE, maybe we take out those acoustic windscreens and some other stuff, and maybe we hold back the 1.25 contingency, that gets us down to that net number that we're kind of looking for, then that's an interesting conversation.
Andrew, the problem which is what I said a few minutes ago, is we're gonna have to still bond the number with the full geothermal in there. So we're still talking about the bond amount not coming down. Even if you tell town meeting, we might get another $4 million in the summer of 28 if Trump lets us have it.
The impact to the, you know, average single family house bill would go down accordingly, right?
I agree. So you could show both. I think what they're gonna focus on is that bond, the 110 million and the 77. And you can say, we might get this, and they're gonna say, well, great that you might, but I've got to look at what I've got to count on here. So we're absolutely gonna mention it, and there's gonna be a slide that shows it, but it's just not something that's gonna reduce that bond amount.
Why are we treating what we're getting in those reimbursements differently than our assumption on the tariffs?
Oh, it just,
No,
it doesn't include it in
right-
11,
Right
right?
now, we would get those.
Yeah, yeah.
So why aren't we saying we would get them?
Because we don't get them to 28. And so even if we get them, they don't come in until the system's in place and it's in service. So therefore, the bond up front for the construction has to include them. And then when Brian goes to permanently bond the project after it's all done, he would be able to reduce it. But the bond that's got to be approved at town meeting has to include them because you got to pay for it up front.
Then I get that. But why aren't we taking the stance that we have $4 million of refunds that will bring that bond cost down when we get them?
Because the bond that has to be approved town meeting can include that, we can say that, we can show that on a slide.
That's
And
fine.
if people will listen, it may, how I said, it may help a couple people change, it may truly influence people, it may change their mind. But the bond that has to truly be approved in the article will include the full cost of the geothermal. In fact, it's gonna say in there, we've got to approve the whole cost, we've got to approve literally $110 million. That's what the MSBA says, even though they've already gonna voted on the grant, we still have to ask the town to approve $110 million.
Okay. Can I ask a couple questions? And unfortunately, I'm gonna have to jump out in about 15 minutes because I've got to run to Neary to pick up my grandson.
Check the soil while you're there.
Yeah. There was a sheet there with additional items. And there was, I'm gonna call it a curtain wall or some sort of sliding entrance door. What was that?
Those were ones that we had seen on one of our tours, that the educators were enamored with. We did not, it came along fairly late in the game, so we didn't put it into our drawings, but we did include an item of 10 of them so that we could see what they would cost.
All right.
So they're not currently in the drawings, but for the sake of discussion, we said, well, what would they be? It was more of a point of discussion. A similar item, but that is in our drawings are the movable partitions, which we show between classrooms and the classroom wings, and then also one at the back of the stage. So it was along those lines of things that the educators had asked us to include, but we knew might be, not entirely necessary.
And my second question is, has the police chief looked at this design?
Yes.
Okay. So he's satisfied that the security issues are in the budget.
Yes, as we have described them to him, and which are described in the estimate as far as like door hardware and things along those lines. We were focused largely on the exterior of the building, talking about how cars enter and things like that, and they were happy with the design. We met with police and fire at the same time. They had very superficial comments, just sort of, thank you for showing this, it looks good overall. We assured them we would continue to meet with them through the process, but for what they've seen right now, they were like, yeah, that sounds right.
So if we're asking you to strip some of the scope out of this, what types of things would you be looking at?
Well, that's tough right now because we did put together a VE list. And what I was doing here on the side, if I take out the things related to the HVAC system, we've only identified about $1 million of what could come out. And those are the straightforward items that we had identified. I think it would be difficult to get to the extent that we're looking at without wholesale, whole spaces, whole areas not being built. It's a decent chunk. Larry, do you have any other
Yeah, I was gonna say,
thoughts?
we can and put together a list, and I was just sort of looking through the plans as we're talking, and one thing we did was increase the size of the gym to add some bleachers, and you could say, okay, well, we don't want to do that, so let's take the gym down to the size that just fits and no bleachers. And that's one that's reasonably easy to point to. Katie was mentioning the operable partitions, of which we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And you could say, okay, we're not going to have those, and that's incrementally a reduction. And go through, and that's a lot of knitting and knitting and tucking, and I'm cautious to say, yeah, we could get ourselves down to this substantial $8 million of reduction. Not to say we can't reduce some amount, and we can put together a laundry list of things that we think and the value associated with it, and go through that later this week.
I
ahead.
think we might be at that stage, only from the standpoint, one of the reactions I've had with the community is, why have we got all this stuff? We seem to be doing it okay without this stuff at other buildings. So, and I was shuffling through the papers, and I can tell you what the cost of the bleachers are, because that's the first thing I went to.
Mhm.
I think we're going to need that kind of a list to balance the educational needs to the financial needs, and really take a hard look at this and remove as much as we can. If there are items that are controversial, we'll have to figure that out. We took a step very early in this project by not saying we'd go to 3 stories. And I was one of the people that voted against that. We're kind of stuck at this point that I think we need to take a hard look at what's in that building and where we can pull it out. And I know that's a horrible exercise.
Mm.
Katie and Larry and Jim and Andy, do the estimators keep track concurrently with bids that are being made right now for projects that are further along, and compare those bids to the estimate that
Yeah.
was done?
Yeah, I can say, in that 6-hour meeting, I think, we had a project bid recently was said about 400 times. That
It-
they said it when they were going
Yeah.
back and forth on rates and stuff like that. They said, well, we had a project bid, last week or a month ago that was X. So yes. Yep. So it's pretty as up to date as you can be.
So they would know which direction things are going generally by keeping track of that, right?
Yep. And that's showing in their escalation number too, where that's heading to. But yes.
Okay, so the add-ons, the 3 add-ons, right? Second art room, the sliding storefront doors, and the new playground, right? I mean, that's another $1 million too. I don't know where this is coming from. It sounds like the education group is communicating directly with architects and saying, do this. But the full Neary Building Committee has not voted on any of this. But don't we have to get this settled either tonight or Thursday night? So, because you only go in with one number, you don't go in with add-ons, correct?
So how it's carried, if you look on the 3011, there's a tab. There's 2 ways you can carry the alternates. So if you click over to the alternates tab, you can carry it, ineligible work and alternates to be included in the district's total project budget, and then alternates excluded from the total project budget that are to be funded through bid savings. So that's how we're carrying it. So it's not, you can carry them through and not have them be as part of the bottom line. Or you can carry them with, so it's basically a deduct change order or an add alt.
But these are included in the number we're looking at today.
They are not.
No, Andrew, they're not. And he's added on the markups, et cetera, from what you see on page 28.
Got it.
Estimate. Okay, so if the bids came in favorably, you could then say we can use those savings to do those. And the MSBA would reimburse a piece of this or not?
They would assess them based on this submission. So if they're reimbursable or not, it's either, I gotta double check, where it might be a time of PFA.
So they're reimbursable though, is $1 per square foot on the building. So the
Yeah.
reimbursable is set that way. If you wanted them as actual bid alternates, you have to set them up in the order in which you plan to take them, so you determine who the proper bidder is.
Yeah. I wasn't.
Or you can say, okay, well, if somehow we magically end up with a little money towards the end of the job, at a certain point you pull the trigger and write a change order and say, okay, we're just going to go ahead and do this. Those are sort of the mechanisms for adding it construction wise. And then the MSBA typically wants to know, well, are they in or out? And to your point, Jim, I think, at this point you'd sort of say, okay, everything I'm hearing says those are out. And, you'd say, okay, we priced them, but nobody has an appetite for them. And so we're going to leave them out.
Well, the second art room adds square footage.
It does.
Okay, Trottier's got a lot of space up there they could use for a second art room. Okay, so I understand that piece as far as how you would still keep that possibility alive through this process. That makes sense.
Is there, Kathy, done with that subject?
Yes, as far as the alternates, yes.
Is there any more feedback we're going to get from MSBA on our ineligible square footage? Or has that been ruled on? I know there was some discussion of we had more special education space that they were, we're going to look and see if they would include it or not. Is that 10,000 the number, or could that possibly come back?
So that's based off the space summary, which hasn't changed. They at each submittal they will review your eligible square footage, but and if there's any changes within the space summary, you have to explain why. And they ask you to do that for that exact reason. But Larry, Katie, correct me if I'm wrong, we've had no changes to the space summary.
That's right. And they did not take exception in the PSR to those special education spaces. Just to answer that one specifically, that's their opportunity to say, no, we don't agree. And they made no comment about it. So they've accepted, just as an example, the special education spaces.
It's been a while since I've looked at the space summary, but what is our whatever 7,000 square ineligible square footage? What to consist of these days?
I don't think we had that high of ineligible, but let me open it up.
Was 10,
Yeah, I know
That's
it's on the
about
right of the 3011. I know there's
10,425 and
6,750.
he's divided by 1.5, I assume to
Right.
get.
I'm just saying, right now we're $8-9 million in that piece, right? And if we're not getting our 40% on that or whatever, effective 30, right? There's a lot of money there. So if we could find ways of making it eligible or reducing the ineligibility, that we get more bang for our buck than looking at other places.
Jim, is that lookable? Is that worthwhile looking at that?
I mean, I feel like that was discussed in a building committee. I know we walked through when we peeled back a lot of the square footage, but that would be a conversation with Greg. And just, I mean, we are up against it for the submittal as well. Because that would be a substantial change. I mean, anything can be looked at. Don't get me wrong. But that would have to be a discussion with the educators.
Okay, Katie, we had talked months ago about the gross up factor, the 1.5 that's been used since day one. When Andrew and I started looking at other projects that were MSBA funded, I guess in the end, you can tell what the final gross up factor is when the design was truly done and every wall was in place, quarters in place. And I believe that in everyone we looked at, it ended up being below 1.5, like 1.42, 1.41, 1.43. When will you know that final gross up factor?
When we're in CDs.
Okay, so
ultimately. I mean, we continue to refine the design. Where we are right now, we have to include space for mechanical and structural and things along those lines. So we keep it at the 1.5, knowing that we have to coordinate all of those other scopes. So we won't have a final understanding of exactly how low that number could get until we've developed the design further.
and then let's say it does go down, it's one, just make up a number, 1.45. Doesn't that mean that the total square footage has come down at that point?
It would, yeah.
Okay, which means then the total cost would, you think, be less, right? The bids based on the actual square footage. It means we might get a little bit less from MSBA too, because they're gonna reimburse less, but the total net cost to us would go down if that number comes down, correct?
It would.
Okay, but it's nothing we can do about it now, is what you're also saying.
It's always our target, but we can't give an exact number of what that could be until we've refined the design further.
Do you know though for a fact it won't go over 1.5, so that's the highest it could be?
We're required to keep it at 1.5 or below.
Okay.
Yep, by MSBA. Yep.
All right, so I still remain a little bit optimistic that in the end, when we get the bids, we actually may have a bid number that's less than all this, but it just doesn't help us get the article passed on May 10th. Mark, are you coming tonight?
Yes.
Because we'll have to repeat some of this to the big group.
Quick question. Did we do any perk tests
We did.
east of the building?
It would be west of the building, up near basically just downslope a little from the current leach field.
Did we do any down from the building?
I can pull up the let's see, we did one by when you first come onto the site by the soccer field.
Yeah,
We did
that
one
one,
there.
that was a wasted effort. I
And then
told you that one would have failed.
and then I believe we did 3. I'd have to refresh my memory. It was either 3 or 4. The other, I know that there was another one that is between the building so there were 2 between the building and the current leach field. I think we assumed that would be the general area that we'd want to be constructing it in, just knowing the rest of the site. Give me 1 second and I can find the
Yeah,
plan.
I think we put one where we thought the best opportunity was for the new leaching field.
All right, the only reason I'm asking is if we could find a way to use gravity, which is free, instead of a pumping system.
Yeah,
We could make the school higher.
Well, that would be my next suggestion
Wouldn't
is
be
That would be a
free.
little more expensive then.
that would not be free.
it wouldn't be free, but it may be a net change.
Oh,
Katie,
Okay.
we've raised it incrementally from where it is today, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
6 inches, I believe.
So we're pumping uphill.
Yeah.
We got a forced main up the hill. I'm just saying, is there a spot that we don't need that? And is it worth poking around?
I think you'd be hard pressed to find the water table there.
Well, we know the water table, it's gonna be up.
Yeah.
It's gonna be
Right, I think
raised
you're gonna
up.
Get away from a raised system regardless, even if you go further down, you're gonna be so close to water table, you're gonna have to do a raised one anyway. So even if you pump it down there and then you have a pump further away.
If we need to pump, that's my question.
Mark, before you go, I just want to make sure that something you said, I understood. You said 3-level school, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And
We-
did we back then, I know that the majority of the committee didn't, based on safety concerns, et cetera. Did we determine what the difference in cost between the 2 and the 3 was back then? I think we did. I just don't remember what the number was.
700,000.
Okay,
That number is in my head too.
Yeah.
so it's not 7 million?
No,
No, but it's 10% of that.
Make sure. Okay, can we talk about contingencies now? Jim, can you be very clear about what is in this cost estimate as far as all types of contingencies?
Sorry, I was on mute. So we are still carrying outside of the construction budget in the bottom line, 2.5% for construction contingency. And again, outside of the estimate, we're carrying and still the 1.5% for soft cost contingency. Within the estimate itself, we're carrying, as Larry had mentioned a little earlier, a design and estimating contingency at 10%, which totals just about 6.4 million. And then
And that's like half of what we had prior, right?
we had 15 previously.
Okay.
15 to
Yep.
10.
Yep. Go ahead, sorry.
Any more? Is that it?
Yeah, so and then we're carrying CM contingency at 3%. So that's within the estimate itself. That's the CM at risk model. So we're carrying that, which is just about 2.6 million.
Okay, so in the end, when the contract has been signed, et cetera, the 2.5 will stay, right? That's our owner's contingency, right?
Correct. Yep.
And so obviously the design goes away, that's done. I assume the soft cost goes away.
No, the soft cost you'll maintain through the project.
Okay, till it's done.
Yep.
Okay.
The
So,
design one should go, right?
Yep. Yeah. As we go through DD 60%, 90%, that 10% will come down incrementally. And somewhat of a judgment call on the information that we have at each stage, but that'll incrementally going down to the bid go to 0.
okay, and how many more cost estimates do we have after we start the design, the DD?
So you have 3. So you'll have a DD estimate, 60% CD estimate, a 90% CD estimate, and then it goes to bid. The 100% are the bid documents.
Okay, back to the contingencies, the CM 3% stays or not?
So that as the design gets refined, it's a little bit of a push and pull with the CM, but that can decrease as well, depending on their comfort level with the design and what they're carrying. But yeah, that's negotiable as we go through the process.
Okay, so the 2.5 and 1.5, they're gonna stay. They're gonna be in the project when the building's going on. Okay, now can we talk about soft costs for a moment? Okay, so the 2 major soft costs are the people on this Zoom, right? Arrow Street and Skanska, correct?
Yep.
Okay, can we talk about how you came up with those and why you need a 1.5% soft cost contingency once you get going?
Yep. So we're carrying 3.5% for OPM fees. That's based off historical data, as we run through the staffing of the project. So I think that's pretty industry standard, and a check against the project itself. And then we're carrying 9.5% for the design team. And Katie, if you don't mind, they did a check for all their sub-consultants to make sure that it fit within that 9.5%. And it does. So the soft cost contingency, you can use it a couple of different ways. That would be for any ad services for the design team. If we ask them to do something that's outside of the scope, that you want to price a change order, that's an ad service to the design team or their sub-consultants. If there was a schedule extension and we had to extend our contract and Arrow Street's contract, it would be used there. And then it's just basically a coverage for any of the overages. If we get into the third-party testing agent that we have throughout, if that becomes a more robust scope, then we would have to dip into soft cost contingency.
Okay, so start with OPM, and when we did the public safety building, we definitely had conversations with the architects, not with OPM. I think they were fine, but with architects about additional services, and we approved them. Okay, so OPM 3.5%. Aren't you still hourly all the way through?
Yeah, it's the contract, how the MSBA contract's written. So it would be hourly. So we would bill that way. And then the design teams is lump sum.
Okay, but based on market right now in Massachusetts for this type of project, you believe that 3.5% is the right number for your firm?
Yes, yep.
Okay, and design team, if my memory serves correct, we actually did sign a contract for a flat fee broken up with stages. Am I wrong about that?
That's correct.
Okay, and then that includes all of the subs that they expect to use for the various things they need to use subcontractors for, correct? Right?
Yep.
So
There
three
are a few that are additional.
Okay, so what do you mean additional, Katie? So where are those if they're not part of the 9.5?
Those are below the line. Let me pull up what I sent.
Yep. Yeah, so it's in the 3011, it's reimbursable services. So it's hazmat, geotech, site survey, traffic studies. So those are carried outside of that, but that's all within the total project budget. So
Okay,
yeah,
I don't know why we'd have a traffic study. Do you, Andrew? Mark?
I'd like to say we're gonna eliminate it. But
Right.
we haven't met with the neighborhood yet.
Mm.
And they're the ones who are probably gonna ask for it.
Yeah, but they're not gonna ask for it before town meeting.
I get it. I get it.
I mean,
Why
we've
don't,
had plenty of traffic studies for Flag because of the
why
project.
don't we take it out and put it on our extra page?
I agree. So Larry, Katie, look how much we've helped you today. Take out the traffic.
Thanks.
You know,
It's
I mean,
55,000 to the good.
okay, we gotta start someplace, right? So take that one out.
Okay.
I don't think we're
I'm gonna run, but I'm gonna leave this running, so when I get back, if you're still on, I'll just sit down.
okay, all right,
Thanks, Mark.
we're pretty close, but we may be, you never know.
All right, I'll see you all tonight.
Okay. All right, so what we've accomplished this meeting is 55,000, right? Everybody agree?
Agreed.
Sure.
All right.
Well, I mean, Kathy, we can't make that call, but I think on the adult, right, we should put that. I don't know if it's an adult.
So
Thing we need to
what
look at, right? But that,
I
I
would
don't think the 600K for the acoustical panels on the roof thing. Got to look at that.
So Katie, I know we chatted about that. I know there's a little bit of backstory there for
Yeah.
the roof panels after we talked to Andrew.
Okay.
I mean,
Right.
Katie,
Sorry, we had, I think I said earlier in this meeting, we had taken off the size of it based on where we're placing the mechanical units. That's just good information to know. We've identified how many units we think we'll have, where they'll roughly be placed. The backstory was when we met with police and fire, the police chief told us that there is one abutter who will call them every time a piece of equipment starts up at 3 a.m. and complain, or if there's a generator test, that sort of a thing. So we know that there's some sensitivity around the site, and you're effectively surrounded on sort of three sides by residential. So we're trying to, until we know the results of having an acoustic engineer come out and measure the sound values on the site, and we tell them what mechanical equipment we are going to have, and what effect that might have, we're including the acoustic screening as our base assumption.
If Chief Newell hadn't told you that, Katie, would you have included this?
Yes, we generally have it. I've not run across many of our schools that don't end up having some. And it depends a little on the site and how far away from the abutters you are and what sort of equipment you're using, but we generally end up using acoustic screening.
I don't think it was in the first estimate.
It was, but it was a smaller amount. They didn't know how much we would have. It was in there.
Well, it might be one that we can look at. Put top throttling.
Well, we want to get that vote at town meeting. We want his vote, so. We don't want him to come and start complaining about the noise and we not have an answer for it. Every vote's gonna count, I think. Okay, so I don't know what else we can do today, but make a, a request that you guys take a look at your VE list, anything you put on it and come up with a number associated with it so that the full committee can look at that and see if the things we'd have to give up are worth it, money-wise.
Yeah, that's the typical procedure, and I foresee that being the discussion on Thursday. We can develop that list, get it out to the group, so that folks can think about it before that meeting. And what we can do is bring things in and out to show what the overall budget does. So yeah, we can definitely do that. And the 55,000 actually got us to 77.8 if instead of 77.9, if that's more palatable.
Can we have a post-it note level thing that includes the rebates for the geothermal too?
I can pull up what we had presented previously. Yes.
Whatever it is, 77 minus the, I don't just remember.
Yeah.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8 million, whatever it was. Just,
Yeah, that would help to show, again, know where we're going as far
Yeah.
as maybe really what's gonna cost us.
yeah, again, it's not part of the 3011, but part of our
Yeah.
sell story to the town.
I like post-it note. That's yeah, exactly. Just on the side, everybody
Just on the
knows
side,
it's there.
something, a little cheat sheet that says, hey, we got this is official, this is MSBA, we got to keep this in mind. But in our one page at town meeting, we might be able to include this little extra special friend.
So while we're
Understood.
here, I'm going to, so the only person in the audience that at least is in the Zoom audience is Mr. Stivers. So Sam, if you're actually still there, do you have any questions while we're doing this? And if you do, you want to raise your hand. If not, I will assume you either don't hear us or you don't have any questions. Oh, he's got his hand over. So, Andrew, can you bring him over? So to everyone else, Sam is one of the 5 members of the select board and literally goes to, I think, every single meeting in this town.
Kathy, thanks for raising the question. I actually don't have any specific suggestions here. I do agree with you that there's huge value in finding a way to get into the first number of 6 on this thing. And I realize that's a challenge, but I continue to be impressed by the level of detail and knowledge by all the participants here and hope there's a way to get that done because I too am worried about getting it through town meeting. So thanks to all for the great effort and good luck to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, Andrew, anything else?
I'm good.
Brian, where are you? Always forget he's here because he's so quiet. Where's Brian? There he is. Brian, anything you want to add to this? I've done everything I can to try to get it down. Okay, all right. Okay. Errol Street, I guess we'll see you tonight. Jim, we'll see you tonight at 7.
Yep.
Okay. All right, so Andrew, you make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I will second. Andrew?
Aye.
And Cook is aye. So thank you guys. See you
Thanks,
tonight.
everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks all.